Hello, my name is Randy Farino, and I will be presenting a slideshow presentation to you about Michael Chekhov. Let's jump right into it. So, Michael Chekhov was born in St. Petersburg, Russia, in 1891. To the parents, his parents were Alexander Chekhov and Natalia Chekhov. Now, Natalia was his mother. However, he had siblings. That was his father's second wife. She nurtured his kids, and then he eventually married her. His father was a novelist and a storyteller. So he also had a brother named Anton Chekhov, who was also a famous playwright. And so he was just born into a family of, authors and playwrights and writers and things of that nature. So he was bound for greatness. Some of his most notable, some of his uncles, Anton Chekhov's most notable plays were the Cherry Orchard, and then also Three Sisters. Now he had plenty more, but those were two of his most notable. And they both premiered at the Moscow Theater in St. Petersburg before he passed. So back to Michael Chekhov. Michael Chekhov was born in St. Petersburg, Russia. He was an actor, he was a teacher, he was also a director and a writer as well. He started school at the Sovereign Theater in St. Petersburg in 1907, and then in 1911 he graduated. He graduated with honors at the age. He started out at 16. He graduated at 20 in 1911, and once 1912 hit, he was invited by Konstantin Stanislavski to join the Moscow Theater in St. Petersburg, and that's an honor to be joined, to be asked by Stanislavski to join his theater. So he accepted, and he worked and studied under him for 16 years in St. Petersburg. While he was there, he was one of the most prized students there too. Even Stanislavski said he was one of his prodigy almost. Very brilliant, very bright, very promising. With all that being said, Michael Chekhov and his mentor Stanislavski did have certain differences when it came to teach acting to different theaters and portraying those different emotions. Now, while Stanislavski, his mentor, dealt more so with realistic acting, but he approached it from a naturalism standpoint. He wanted you to recall different emotions and feelings through. He wanted you to recall them um, rather than how Chekhov thought about it, where Chekhov thought it was a healthier way to do that and you could use your imagination. Stanislavski, when you recall them, you're almost like reliving those traumas, those past traumas, which can be very detrimental to your health. Again, Chekhov thought that it was a better way to do that, so he do it with imagination. I found out from one of my classmates that when he was there on one year, again, one of the best students there, he also met his wife there, by the way, just a fun fact. But while he was there, he played a role as for being someone's father. Well, once the role was over with, they say he embodied the role very well, and his father was supposed to have died or whatever. So he was supposed to tap into those emotions because he told everyone that his father had died. After the show was over with, he confessed that my father's not dead, my father's still alive. And of course, that didn't go over too well with his mentor Stanislavski, and he suspended him from the school for 2 weeks. So we came back, but I can see why, because while he was there, he went through a mental breakdown. He dealt with depression. Stanislavski dealt with depression. So again, you can see how his that method acting mindset can take a toll on your mental health. And with those differences being said, and he thought there was a better way to approach acting and tap into those emotions, he eventually broke away from the theater. There was no beef or anything. There wasn't any bad blood. He just, wanted to try his own thing. So he broke away in 1918. And he started developing his own teaching style, his own techniques, his own style of acting, and teaching his actors how to do certain things. While he was at the Moscow Art School, he worked under Voktalgov. What is Hold on, give me a second. Voktalgov, Voktalgov, which was one of his professors. He eventually left Moscow Theater also and started up the first studio theater in St. Petersburg. Back to Michael Chekhov, he toured around Russia, doing his teachings and developing his own style. And in 1921, his former professor, Oktagov, he passed away, and he was over the first theater. Now, again, just because they kind of differed on beliefs, Michael Chekhov and Stanislavski, that doesn't mean that Stanislavski, had any bad blood with him. So once his other professor died, he was appointed by Stanislavski to take over the first studio in 1922. And then in 1924, it was later named the second Moscow Art Theater. And then, of course, Michael Chekhov stayed there from 1922 all the way up until 1928. By the time he reached 1928, he ran into another dilemma. So it's one thing to clash with your instructor. However, he eventually clashed with his with the government. The Russian government, the Soviet government, actually. So it was a communist government, and their beliefs just, just were different. He believed in individualism. Being a creator, and as a creative, you want to be individual and teaching actors and people to tap into the individual styles, and then of course they were collectivism. So, and with communism, collectivism, that just basically deals with trying to, I guess, getting everyone there to work as a community to collectively do things together. To no one had no power over the other one. Everything was equal. We're all going to work together to get things done and run this community. Now that sounds fine until you realize that most times in those type of governments, those situations, the government runs everything. So it's kind of like, you really don't have to say so. You kind of got to get with the program. Of course, that stunts your growth. And from an artistic standpoint, he wasn't too much having. Also, in that same setting, he dealt with, he wanted to protect and preserve some of his beliefs, spiritual beliefs, and some of his creative beliefs that he learned from his mentor, Stanislavski. Again, they weren't necessarily at odds. They just had their differences, and that's fine. The government over there, however, you know, Chekhov dealt with spirit, being a spiritualist, and they were dealt with atheism. He wasn't for that as well. So again, that was another thing. And of course, you have artistic, differences, and then they believed in socialist realism. So you can see how he clashed with the government, and he was a well-renowned author, director, and things of that nature, and playwright. So his influences kind of were out there. It's going against the government. They eventually like, okay, we got to put an end to this some way, somehow. Well, they said we're going to defund you. They eventually defunded the school, so he lost funds for the school to kind of keep it up. And then they eventually said, okay, we're about to arrest you. Well, at that point, he was exiled. In other words, he had to flee the country. He was barred from the country, and it got so bad to up from the time he had to leave the entire country of Russia up until the 1980s, if I'm not mistaken. He was They basically tried to erase him from the history books. They erased him from as much, knowledge and a plethora of acting techniques and impact that he had on the actors in that area. They tried to erase him from the history books up until the 1980s, and they kind of brought him back in. Now he never went out of existence. He never lost fame or anything like that. But that's what they tried to do to him because he didn't really get with the program. So he eventually left the entire continent of Europe and came to America. Once he got to America, he worked in Hollywood. Wood. Again, all of those things that he did over there, he was doing those to kind of experiment with his technique and hone in on his technique and get his technique off the ground to teach it. Well, what was Chekhov's technique? I'm glad you asked. His technique, first of all, dealt with imagination. Again, he thought using imagination to tap into different characters and different emotions, was way healthier, which he had a point, than to recall those emotions and relive those past traumas. So that was one of his first techniques, imagination. The second was movements, where you use your body to tap into those emotions, and you use your I guess you would use your body to and that energy to embody everything physically. And then you have physical actions, which is where that goes into the psychological gestures, or PG, where you would use those things um to I guess to embody those characters also from a physical standpoint. So you use your imagination to conjure up those emotions, and then you use physical actions to portray those things as well. So we'll talk about a few of them. Not all of them here, but here's a list of some of his techniques as we move forward. So again, you have the atmosphere. We did. You have imagination. Um, you also have movement. Of course, PG. So all those things. So that's just a few. Just to have a few. So let's tap into the qualities of movement. So with the qualities of movement, and I love this. Quality of movie deal with, so the first quality of movie, it was four qualities that he believed in. One of them, the first one was molding. So molding was more so the a solid shaping of energy that you would use in order to portray or to tap into those characters. So you would shape that using, shapes and solid to solid energy to a certain extent. And then you have a floating energy. So that was more of a more light, airy, gentle approach to portraying those different movements and things of that nature. And then you also have flying. Flying dealt with elevating, kind of like an elevating energy to a certain extent. And then you have the last one, which I love the most, which is radiation or to radiate. And to radiate will be also more so you tap into that energy and you radiating it across from you, almost like magic. I love that because it's almost like you radiate these emotions and these whatever you can conjure up, and you push it across the stage to connect with your the other actors, or you may push it out into the audience, and that audience member or the audience may push it back to you, or that actor on stage may push that back to you, and then boom, and you kind of feed off of each other. So I really, really love the radiation. Then of course you have emotional imagination of recall again that dealt with allowing the actors to invite those emotions in rather than kind of recall past traumas. I mean, you get, great results from both, but at the end of the day, at what expense? Your mental health, not necessarily worth it. So that's that. We also have the ideal center. Now, I really love the ideal center also. So the ideal center deals with the actors and each character using that energy, and you putting that energy somewhere in your body. Well, once that energy for that character is in your body, as the energy may move from here to there, so does the rhythm of it. So does the the emotional quality of it. So does the pattern of it. And you can move it from your chest to your head, and most times to your stomach and pelvic area. It could be your arms, but let's just say, so what that would look like is you would move that ideal center, move that energy, center that energy to your chest. And so everything you do it will move from your chest, and then you may come back and you may put it in your head and you may move forward with your head. And then you also stomach, pelvic area, move forward with your pelvic area and things of that nature. So I really love that. And then, of course, you have atmosphere. Now, atmosphere deals with breathing in, just breathing in that room, that space, that mood of that play or that scene, and really using that to tap into those emotions to play that scene or play that role or play that character, use it for that particular space. So I love that also. And then here's just a list of different activities that you can use to do those things. You can close your eyes and imagine certain things to get the imagination. You can again close your eyes and breathe in for the atmosphere and breathe in that mood, breathe in the atmosphere. You can also use the ideal center. Again, you can start it out with your pelvis and move, and then move, shift the energy from your pelvis to your chest and lead with your chest, and then you can move it to your head and move your head. But do you see and feel the difference when you put it in those different areas, maybe to your arms? So it just all depends on where you move it to. So his techniques have been used in a plethora of productions and stage plays, but we're just going to name a few. One of his most notable ones was Spellbound. That was done with Alfred Hitchcock in 1945 when he moved to Hollywood. And he starred in that. Well, he did a cameo in that particular production, and then I want to say that he was nominated for an Oscar for that particular role. So that was very, very awesome. He also got a chance to use his techniques in the Boston Conservatory, used it in The Death of a Salesman. Another school used it in The Little Prince. And then, of course, he worked with a plethora of artists and thespians, actors as well. But three of his most notable ones was Anthony Hopkins, Marilyn Monroe, and then you have Clint Eastwood. So just to name a few. And then if you want to know any more information or know where I got my information from, you can check out my citation or my sites page, and you can read that book. And you can also read "To the Actor" um, by Simon How 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 Callum. I'm sorry. So again, this is a presentation on Chicago. So I'm glad that we talked slightly about Stanislavski, but I want you to more so dwell on when you get ready to do your productions or your next production to use that Michael Chekhov technique, or at least try it out so that you can use your body to embody those characters and radiate and float and mold into those characters that you would like to, rather than using that mental to do it. I mean, if you have to, if you want to tap into those other things, you can. But however, this more so deals with and gives you an idea of what Michael Chekhov did in order to teach acting and his techniques in a healthier manner. Thank you for allowing me to present you to this presentation, uh, and have a good evening.